Oh hey, it's Emily, and today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in the months of March and April. I'm going to try to be as speedy and snappy as I can, and I will link what I can below that has, whether it's vlogs or other videos that have more thoughts about any of the books that I'm going to mention as I can. I will also very briefly mention what books I read in April, what prompt they relate to as far as the magical readathon, which I'll link more information about below as well. But that's going to be very brief. In short, I gave myself a bunch of options as far as what career I want to go for with the magical readathon, and I'm basically going to decide later. So I gave myself a bunch of options, but haven't really committed to or decided anything, which basically sums up my personality. So let's just jump straight into the month of March, and then we'll get to April, and hopefully I can keep things moving quickly. So the first thing I read in the month of March was Well Matched by Jen DeLuca. This is the third book in this is the third book in Jen DeLuca's series that centers a town that has a Renaissance fair that is kind of central to these characters' lives. And we follow the older sister of the protagonist of our first book. We follow April and Mitch. It's a fake dating scenario. It's a Grump Sunshine scenario. And I appreciated so much about this book. I thought it was well written, as I think all of her books have been. I think it's hilarious, it's charming, it's so cute. They are so sweet together. I adore them individually, I adore them as a couple, and I really appreciate that April is also a mother, and that is a huge part of the story. That's not abandoned or, that's not a side plot. That is very much a part of the story as well, and a part of her life as well. I adored this. I adored everything about this. I thought it was just so much fun and just cute, and just it was a feel-good time. The next thing I read was The Maid by Anita Prose. This one follows Molly, who is a maid at a fancy hotel. And she sees the world differently, perceives the world differently from others, and for that she is judged and used and misunderstood. And the main plot centers around Molly finding a dead body as she's going in to clean one of the rooms at the hotel. So she kind of gets caught up in this investigation, and things that she does seem suspicious to the investigators because they're misunderstanding her. You also see, if you're able to read between some of the lines that Molly can't, you do kind of have a sense of what's going on. So the mystery part of it I don't think is the point. The point is understanding Molly, understanding her perspective, and getting to know her and seeing the world through her eyes. That's the point of the story. But such a good one. I felt it could pretty well be described as a cozy mystery. So much fun, super interesting. I had a really great time listening to this one. I did read the audiobook and would highly recommend. And the next book I read in the month of March was Cambodian Folk Stories. This is one that Kim and I are doing for Reading Around the World. I will link more details below. And we wanted to read some folk stories because we thought that would be a fun thing to do for as many of the countries as we can. So we found a collection of some Cambodian folk stories. I thoroughly enjoyed reading through these. There were a lot of them. They were pretty short stories, so there are quite a few, even though it's a pretty short collection. So I don't necessarily have individual thoughts on all of the individual stories or anything, but I had a really great time reading through them. I just thought they were a lot of fun to read, and definitely just interesting stories. I don't know, I had a good time. The next one that I read was Jade Fire Gold by June C.L. Tan. The general gist of this is that we follow two main characters. One is trying to understand her power and more of her history. The other is trying to reclaim his throne. And their destinies kind of get intertwined. I will be honest though, a lot of this has left my brain. And I was listening to the audiobook. There was a lot going on at the time I was listening to this, so my listening experience was just very fragmented. I'm not sure if that had something to do with it, or maybe just audio wasn't the best way for me to take in this story. I do remember enjoying it and having positive feelings, but so many of the details have left my mind. So I'm thinking about doing a physical reread at some point, just to see just try it a different way and see if that will stick more. Anyway, the next one I want to talk about is The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis. I really enjoyed this one. This is a historical fiction. We follow 2 different timelines, and I've come to find that following a couple of different timelines that are intertwined is something I really like. So we follow a timeline that's in, is it the 20s or the 30s? And we follow a model who is a model for artists who are creating sculptures. So they're kind of the, you know, they need a muse, an inspiration, something to kind of help them design, or someone to help them design this sculpture and kind of, you know, help them in that process. So she's a model that works with artists who are making sculptures. So there are sculptures inspired by her, you know, all around New York City. A bad situation, bad things have happened and she needs to escape, but she needs money to do so. So she, you know, tries to lay low but also accepts a job working with the Frick family. And at one point in that timeline, one of the members of the family dies and there's an investigation around that. We also follow a timeline in the 60s, and we follow a model who is in New York City for a job and kind of gets stuck there with some bad, at the Frick mansion, gets stuck there with some bad weather and kind of discovers this entire mystery about what happened surrounding this death. And so she's uncovering clues and things are happening in that timeline, but also you're kind of jumping back to the 20s or 30s. And getting this other perspective as well. I had a really fun time with this one. I loved jumping back and forth. I loved both timelines. I loved our characters in both timelines, and was just super intrigued to see what was going to happen. And so I thought that device was used pretty effectively here, and I had a really fun time with this one. The next one I want to talk about is The One by John Marrs. I had been listening to some slower paced books and I really just wanted something that was fast and going to grab my attention and not let me go. And I'd heard that The One was something that would do this. So I listened to the audiobook of The One. You follow a bunch of different perspectives. They are narrated by different people, which was really cool. So would highly recommend the audio experience if you enjoy audiobooks. And so you follow quite a cast of characters who are all impacted by this genetic test to find your one true love match. And, you know, ask different questions like what would happen if, yeah, or like what if you're in a relationship? Do you want to actually take that test to find out if your fiance, for example, is your one true genetic love match? You know, what happens if that match, you know, the person you've matched with is dead? What happens if they're sick? You know, you follow, there's a perspective of a serial killer and a cop. You follow a high-powered business executive. You just follow a bunch of interesting perspectives, asking different questions about what would happen or how would people react if this were a real thing. So it was just very interesting from that perspective. And it's not immediately a fast-paced read. I think John Marrs really does start out slowly, or more slowly compared to the second half of the book in particular, just to give you time to actually get to know the characters. So it doesn't move too quickly at first. You actually do get to know the characters, you get to know their situations, you get to kind of feel invested in all of these different storylines. And, you know, I was able to keep them straight in my head because there was enough time spent to kind of develop them. And then things got intense and moved super quickly, and you think you know where some things are going, and then some things just completely change. So it was super fun. I had a really good time with this one. The last thing I read in the month of March was In the Shadow of the Minion, and this is by Vadi Ratner. And this is a work of fiction, but pulls from real experiences from the author's childhood. So you follow from the perspective of a child who is caught up in the Cambodian Revolution, and just so her family, along with many others, are forced from their home. You know, they're forced to frequently relocate. There's a bunch of stuff going on that just gets progressively worse and worse and worse. Their healthcare is not being provided for. Food rations are really tight. And so you follow a family's really sad experiences throughout this, but it was incredibly beautifully written. So if you're wanting to learn more about that time period in Cambodia's history, would highly recommend. Again, beautifully written, incredibly sad, but beautifully written, really informative, and yeah, would recommend. So we'll now get into the books I read in the month of April. The first one is The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. So this one is a mystery that follows Jess. She asked to stay with her brother to kind of get back on her feet. He accepts, but when she goes to his apartment, he's not there. She manages to get in, but she's trying to figure out where he is and what's going on with him, and the people in this building are acting really suspiciously, and she's just trying to figure out what's going on. That's really all I want to say as far as the actual plot. Felt very much like a Ruth Ware book to me in a couple of key ways. It's pretty slowly paced, character driven. Things slowly ramp up. It's not intense throughout the entire book. You're not quickly ratcheting up. Little creepy things or things that give you pause are happening, and things are just slowly building as she's unraveling the mystery of what's happening. I also really like that for the most part we're in this small space of this apartment building, and so I really like when mysteries are kind of in relatively small contained places and they're trying to figure out a mystery there in order to get out. And I had a ton of fun with this one. Listen to the audiobook, would also recommend this one. There are different perspectives from this building that you follow. You don't just follow Jess's perspective, but I did enjoy the audio experience of having different narrators for these different perspectives. Some people might feel it's too many perspectives, but I enjoyed having those additional perspectives. So this book can kind of count for several different things. It could be a quick read. It was a pretty quick listen. It could be a trope I like, and kind of mysteries in confined spaces or thrillers in confined spaces is definitely a trope I like. It could be intimidating too, because I read Lucy Foley's book The Guest List, and I think it just didn't meet what I expected it to be at the time, and so I didn't end up enjoying it, and I was afraid going into this one, or intimidated going into this one. Next book I read in the month of April was Loveless by Alice Oseman. I absolutely adored this one. This one follows Georgia as she's discovering her asexuality. She's going to university, kind of going off to university after completing high school, and is kind of learning about herself. That's really the main thing of what's going on. I love the writing. I found quite a bit of this relatable as a demisexual, and I love this one. I love Georgia. I love the side characters. I thought the side characters really added a lot in this one as she's kind of figuring out what's going on and who she is. So that sounds interesting. Would highly recommend. And that one can be featuring romance. Actually, there's a very prominent romance with some side characters that's developing throughout the story. I'm not going to say more, but just it does feature romance, so that it would count for that trope, even though the main character is asexual and aromantic. Anyway, the next book I read in the month of April was City of Ashes. This is book 2 of the Mortal Instruments series. This one can be featuring healers, because some of the characters can use healing runes and heal each other or heal themselves, so we're just going to count it as that. And this one continues Clary's story as she gets pulled into the world of shadow hunters. I don't want to talk about this one specifically because it's the second in the series, but fun time, very dramatic, angsty YA, a bit slower paced I think than the first one, or I guess I tried to cram less into this story, so maybe it's slightly better paced than the first one. But still just enjoyable. I was still intrigued to figure out what was going to be happening to Clary and some of these other characters. I still don't love the romantic elements of what's going on, and sometimes if you're not in the mood for like angsty YA, don't read it. But I had a really fun time with it. And the next one I read was Once Upon a Broken Heart, and this is by Stephanie Garber. This could also be a trope I like in terms of a character making a deal that they know is probably not going to turn out well for them, and then they get in over their head. I've enjoyed quite a few stories with that trope. This one is very fairy tale-esque feeling. You follow Evangeline, who wants to wants to stop her sister's wedding because her sister is marrying her one true love, but our main character is convinced that their stepmom has actually just put some sort of curse, some sort of spell over her sister, and that's why that happened. And so she's trying to figure out what's going on, why her sister kind of stole her one true love, as she gets kind of pulled into a bunch of stuff with that. And she needs to seek the help from Jax, the King of Hearts, in order to try to stop this. But of course, he wants 3 kisses in exchange for helping her, and he gets to control, or in order for this bargain to be fulfilled, he needs to pick who she kisses and when, and she has to kind of go with that when he wants. Anyway, it felt very much like fairy tale vibes. So if that's something you're in the mood for, would highly recommend. The character work isn't super in-depth, but it frequently isn't with fairy tale stories. The part of the point is for you to be able to kind of put yourself into the story, I think, which is easier to do if the character work is kind of kept at a certain level. So I think it's intentional, and I think works well with the story and the way the story is told. If you're in the mood for that, I think this is a fun example of that. Yeah, and I definitely enjoyed this one. And the next one I read was Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is for short stories or essays. That was one of the prompts as well. And this is a collection of John Green's thoughts on random things to do with modern society and the age that we live in. And it was hilarious. It was so funny, but it was also incredibly insightful. Made me think a lot, and it kind of bounces between some more serious things, but also just some random things he just wanted to talk about that are a bit less serious and a bit more lighthearted. I would highly recommend. If you like John Green's sense of humor and just the way he thinks about the world, the way he observes the world and talks about the world, I think you'll really enjoy this one. I definitely did. And he narrates the audiobook too, which was just a delightful experience. So the next thing I read was Year of the Reaper. This could also count for a quick read. This was a pretty short YA, and I listened to the audiobook, so it went by pretty quickly. I really enjoyed this one. This is a standalone, and this one follows a plague that has happened. You follow a character who kind of got caught in a political situation, and there's a princess who is marrying into another kingdom's into the royal family of another kingdom for political reasons, and you follow someone who's been caught up in some politics during this plague, and then after is trying to figure out what's going on because people around the queen, who has kind of come over to this kingdom to marry for political reasons, people around her who are close to her are being killed, and our main character is trying to figure out why and what's going on. I thought this one was super fun, easy to get through, fast-paced, and doesn't try to do too much. Again, it's a standalone, and sometimes if it's a standalone, sometimes it can try to do too much and wrap up too much in a short story or in one story, but I think it didn't try to do too much. It kept the storylines relatively simple so that they could be adequately done in the space provided. Anyway, I had a good time with this one. The next thing I read was Saga Volume 2, and this was for the prompt under 100 pages. And again, not going to say too much about this one. I wrapped up the first volume in my January-February wrap-up, and I have very similar thoughts. Art is so cool, the storyline is incredibly fun and interesting and entertaining, and you're following a couple who has a child. The child is, as an adult, the one narrating the story, looking back on their life and telling the story of their parents who are from rival places, and there are proxy wars between these two groups that are happening all over the galaxy. But, you know, two people from these rival groups have fallen in love and had a kid, and they're being hunted by both sides. And so it's a lot of fun. I don't have much more to say about that. The next thing I read was The Coldest Touch by Isabel Sterling. Again, a standalone, and I had a lot of fun with this one. It's contemporary, which doesn't always appeal to me, but you follow someone who can sense how people are going to die when she touches them, and a vampire. The vampire needs to talk to our first character that I mentioned so that she can kind of explain her magical abilities, kind of bring her into the fold of other worldly creatures and help her learn how to use her powers. And, you know, they end up falling in love. They both have other things going on, and I had a really fun time with this one, actually. I really liked their dynamic. I liked the world. The world was just a lot of fun, and I would actually read other books. If Isabel Sterling were to write other books set in this world, I would definitely read them, and would probably have a really good time doing it. And kind of the main storyline sets off when our first character, who can see people's deaths, predicts the death of a teacher, and she's really trying to hone her powers so that she can work with the vampire and other characters to prevent this teacher's death. I had a fun time with this one. The last thing I finished was On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden. I absolutely loved this one. This one could be for quick read, this one could be for set in the future as well. I need one for set in the future, so that can count for this one. And it's a graphic novel, and you follow a couple of characters who are traveling across space to get to each other. One character is traveling across space to get to someone that she's fallen in love with, but they got separated for reasons, and she's trying to find her to make sure that she's okay. And you follow two women who are the main characters of this, and our main character, who's trying to find the person that she was separated from, find the woman she was separated from, she's on a spaceship, and you also follow the crew of this spaceship, very much a found family situation there. You also follow some of their backstories and how it relates to the rest of the story. And I loved kind of how the different timelines were interweaved. I loved the dynamics between a bunch of our characters. I really actually grew to care about our two main love interests, and really was just swooning at them finding each other, or trying to find each other. And it was cute, it was precious. I devoured this. The one other book I want to talk about is Witches Steeped in Gold, and this was for the prompt mythology inspired. I'm still going to count myself as having completed this. I'll also be reading other stuff coming up that's mythology inspired, but I ended up DNFing this one at about 150 pages in. I just was not being pulled in, unfortunately. And so I don't want to say too much about this one. You're following a couple of witches. One is very close to the person who's in power, and she's going to be taking over at some point. You also follow someone who, she feels that her family is supposed to have that throne. So it's such a cool concept, but it just wasn't pulling me in. And 150 pages in, I still wasn't wanting to pick it up. So I ultimately ended up not finishing that one. But that was for the prompt mythology. And again, because I'm officially taking it off my TBR, or my to be read list, I'm counting it as completing a prompt. Anyway, so thank you so much for watching, and subscribe for more bookish content. If you read any of these, let me know what your thoughts were. And again, I'll link a bunch of stuff below, including my Twitter and Instagram, and more information about how you can support the Black Lives Matter movement. And I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.